Good morning, Devils fans. It is July 1st, 2023 at 9:55 a.m. I'm Jake, and I'm your host of this series brought to you by the Devil's Advocates. Being as it is July 1st, that means it is the first day of free agency, and thus the first day of the 2023-24 NHL season. This is probably going to be a fairly quick and to the point episode, as for the most part, our RFAs and UFAs are handled outside of a handful of names such as McLeod, Boqvist, and Bastian, who were not qualified, as well as Kevin Ball, who seems very likely to be getting a new contract. My guess is somewhere in the maybe 2-year range, barely over $1 million. Give him a little bit of raise, a little bit of runway to show what he's got, and earn himself that much bigger payday down the road. As far as the other three go, from what I'm hearing, Boqvist seems like a likely re-sign. Little bit north of that ball number, but not by too much. Again, needs to prove himself a bit more in that bottom six role that he was beginning to thrive in as the relentless forechecker that he is. But needs to find a little bit more of that scoring finesse to make himself a staple in this very, very deep Devils lineup. Bastian, it is my indication, is asking for a bit more money than our team is comfortable paying for a fourth liner, as our cap situation this year, maybe a little bit next year, is going to be a little tight, but I think we are due for great things, especially when that cap starts going up by $4+ million a season going forward. McLeod, however, while I think the team would have been okay offering him and paying him a little bit more than would be typical of a fourth liner, given that he was a premier face-off man, not only for the team, but throughout the entire league, and showed in the playoffs that his motor, as well as the series-winning goal, were something to be coveted. But there's a bit of a lingering, outside influence that is my understanding might lead to him not receiving a contract, as well as those that are in a similar situation to him having the same fate. But we will see what it works out being as we move forward here. As far as guys not currently in our system, I don't think there's too much work for time to do. I expect we might see a very short term, no more than 2 years, probably hopefully 1 year, on a veteran depth, probably right-handed defenseman that could step in if Shimon Nemec is not quite ready, although I think he is going to force his way onto the team this year, and so management likely does not want to fill that hole unless they absolutely have to. We also know from Tom's pressers that he is looking for wingers. I think a large part of that is due to the fact that Bastian and Boqvist might be coming in a little bit higher than they were hoping, especially Bastian, who is permanently a fourth liner, where Boqvist can play in more of that third line, if he really hit his ceiling, possibly middle six type role, but obviously with the absolute stacked top six that we have, he is unlikely to force his way in there. So for wingers, I think we are looking more so at that fourth line winger role to be filled with probably more of just a stopgap. I think we are likely to see Nolan Foote given a wide berth to force his way into that fourth line left wing role to be filled where Miles Wood was, as we know he is not going to be returning to the team, similar to all of our other unsigned UFAs, like Graves, Tatar. Although I very much appreciate and love them on this team, Tatar obviously a impeccable regular season. Once again, seems to have a bit of playoff woes, but I think he was solid for what he is. Obviously would have liked a little bit more production in the playoffs, but still played a very solid game. But his money was essentially replaced by Toffoli, and there's just not a room for him on this team. And whoever does end up with him will be very happy. Graves obviously priced himself out, and with Luke Hughes coming in and already having a very deep defensive core signed up, it was not worth paying Graves the contract that he was going to get, similar to Damon Severson, which moved out for an asset that we then flipped over to get to Foley. Truly GM of the year type stuff, how he came fifth in the voting. Even last year before that move is beyond me. I think he will earn himself that reputation this year and will easily be a finalist, if not the deserved winner. Miles Wood, like I said, is obviously not returning. He also played himself into that hockey man type contract, but we are not going to pay him. So we will bring in ELC to help buoy our cap situation for this year. Now, another ELC from our system, like maybe someone like a Graham Clark potentially, or even just using Lazar as that fourth line right winger or center stopgap, I do think we will see someone brought in on a very short term, very cheap deal. One name that's somewhat stuck out to me if we are looking to fill in that right wing spot was possibly Garnet Hathaway, mostly just for his absolute size and physicality. Although I do not expect that to be an absolute go to for Tom. I know he wants that fourth line to still keep the pace of our team, and I'm not quite sure Hathaway still has that in him at his age. But if he's on an absolute minimum deal, or even, I don't know if he'll be a PTO type guy, I think we could see that role filled, as really our top nine is pretty locked in. Obviously, the only real question mark is potentially Holtz, who I think will force his way onto the team. But if they wanted a potential third line right wing stopgap, I think that's where Boqvist really will come in, and they will potentially pay him that extra $100,000-$200,000 just to get him locked up. The top of the free agency class is really not in our wheelhouse. I did see just before I started recording that our name was linked to Wheeler. I personally am not for this. His locker room shenanigans is not something I think Tom will bring to this team, where he has time and time again talked about how important the locker room culture is for us. Now, I do think with Nico, our captain here, running the room along with Jack, Dougie, Palat, Toffoli, who is apparently very outspoken in the room, will keep that culture that we have built here, where Wheeler might not come in and really mess with that too much. He really would be, an absolute best. He would fill in on the second line if really needed, likely a third. We could, with this team, could potentially even force him down to a fourth line role. I just don't see the money or fit really being worth it. But if Tom really wanted to stick to having the best top nine in the entire league, he might talk himself into it. I just think there are other cheaper options, unless Wheeler is willing to take an absolute minimal deal to cup run with us, that is not going to mesh with the feng shui that we have going on here. That's really about it. As far as a defenseman depth that we might be looking at, I know Ian Cole is a very popular name among our fan base. But like I said, I just see Nemec really forcing his way onto this team. And I think Ian Cole might command a little bit more than we're going to be looking to spend if he does end up being buried. But I guess there's always the option of sending him down and dealing with the consequences of that later. Come tomorrow, I will have a much more in-depth reaction to the moves not only we make that are made around the league, possibly seeing how the teams around us, not only in the Metro but in the East, end up stacking up their teams. Because I think we are possibly odds-on favorite with the Bruins falling off and the Canes being stagnant, although they definitely have the room and money to bolster up their lineup. To really being the only team to threaten us here in the East. Tampa Bay's on the downturn. Tampa's getting worse with the 3-year contract to Ryan Reeves. Thank you very much. We will run through him all day, every day going forward. So we appreciate that move by you there, Tree Living. And there's really no one else in the East even worth talking about. The Panthers made a bit of a miracle run. I do not see Bob repeating that. He barely was able to hold it together even after staying hot at the beginning of playoffs. He cooled off during the break and just wasn't the same stop of a wall that he was leading up to the playoffs there in the finals. And they barely were able to make it in. Now, I do think Matthew Tkachuk, along with McDavid and Jack, were the top 3 players in the entire league last year. Pasta, obviously, an honorable mention of the fourth. But I don't think he's going to be enough to carry that team through a full season, especially when you look at a full season of Timo here, a full season of Toffoli. Whatever we do end up doing on the back end with a goalie, it sounds like there will be a free agent signing, not necessarily that trade that has been hyped up with Winnipeg for Hellebuck. Although I do have some hopes that we go more the trade route than a free agent signing for a goalie, unless somebody really does take a little bit less to come here. So with all that being said, give me your thoughts and predictions to come in before any news breaks, as I will react to what actually happens as I come to you tomorrow. Like I said, keeping this one pretty short and to the point. That way, come tomorrow, I have a bit more to react to and can actually go a bit more in depth once moves are actually made and I get a much better idea of the landscape that's going on. Please tune in. I hope to have this series going on for a very long time. Through the off season is going to be a bit of a sludge, but once that season gets here, it'll be all worth it. Thank you guys so much, and let's go Devils.